Welcome to Pop Culture Retro, which was recently voted the 15th best podcast by the residents of Golden Years Retirement Community in Boca Raton, Florida. Each show, we'll revisit some of your favorite pop culture memories with insider and outsider perspectives. Now, please help me welcome your hosts, Moosie Drier and Jonathan Rosen.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Pop Culture Retro. I'm Jonathan Rosen, along with Moosie Drier, and today we are thrilled to welcome the designer of such classic Atari video games as Yars' Revenge, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and perhaps the most famous or infamous Atari 2600 game of all time, E.T. the Extraterrestrial. The author of Once Upon Atari, How I Made History by Killing an Industry. Please help us welcome Howard Scott Warshaw. Howard, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Jonathan and Moosie, it's just great to be here with you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Yes, well, we have a lot to cover, and we're definitely going to get to E.T., but I want to start by going back with you. So you started off in another career entirely. I mean, you started off at Hewlett-Packard. So what did you do for them?
Hewlett-Packard, I was what's called a multi-terminal system engineer. This was way back in the days before the internet, when networking was just really starting to come into vogue. And I was one of the engineers who was helping make networking possible at Hewlett-Packard, and also starting to do some of the initial software that would help Hewlett-Packard mainframes connect to the internet, ultimately. The ARPANET back then.
What you did basically became later on the internet and messaging.
Absolutely.
How did you come to work at Atari in the first place?
Well, I was really, really bored at Hewlett-Packard. I mean, I was just, and so I used to act out a lot. I was kind of a zoo case there. In fact, I was kind of a zoo case pretty much anywhere I went. And I would do wacky stuff throughout a day. And one day, one of my cube mates came up to me and said, I was telling my wife a Howard story the other day. And he said, where she works, they do stuff like that all the time. And I said, oh, where's that? And he says, Atari. And that was the first time I'd ever heard of Atari as a place to work. I knew they made games. I thought that was cool. But it never occurred to me. I had a master's in computer engineering in the late 70s, there weren't even that many computer science departments then. So this was, and I had done a lot of real-time control programming. And when you have that kind of programming background, there's really two main places you can go. You can go into the military and do multiple target discretion, or you can make video games. And I was at Hewlett-Packard doing neither. And so I loved that kind of programming. And but when I heard Atari was a wacky place to work, and I just needed to get out of Hewlett-Packard. So I talked my way into an interview and got a series of interviews, went through the whole process with them. And then in the final analysis, they rejected me. They said they weren't going to hire me because they felt I was too straight, too conservative to work at Atari, which became an incredible joke later on as time went on, because even at Atari, I was still kind of a zoo case. But when I interviewed, I put on, my professional demeanor and was very formal, and they misread that as me being kind of a square,
straight-laced,
or just kind of out of it. And so when they told me they weren't going to hire me, I just pushed back. I just said, "Oh no, we're not going to miss this job badge." I just pushed back and negotiated with them, and I talked my way into a 20% pay cut and to come in on probation, and I was happy to do it.
You're a good negotiator. So by the time you got to Atari, it was already the gaming system on the market, but it was also still relatively new. So was it as crazy as you're saying that they made it out to be? What was it like working there?
Oh, it was insane. And it was wonderful. It was amazing. Atari was it was an incredible collection of incredibly smart oddballs. Right? Because the 2600 was an extremely primitive hardware. So it was agonizing to program on it. So the people who were going to make games on this system had to be really extraordinary tech heads to start with. But there are a lot of tech heads who are no fun whatsoever and have no idea how to entertain or create anything that's amusing to someone. Because you also had to be goofy, you had to be weird, you had to have it's a right brain, left brain mix, right? You have to be analytical enough and nerd enough and nitpicky enough to want to get into this ridiculous, painful, detailed architecture and handle things at the microsecond level where you're literally counting microseconds to make sure you hit registers at exactly the right place. And at the same time, you had to be goofy enough to want to try wacky, weird things and have a sense of what is fun.
They wanted that combination of person to be working for their company and designing, and I think that was smart. That works.
It was. I mean, working at Atari was an amazing experience because what I like to say about Atari, and I say it in my book, Once Upon Atari, is that when you expect things to make sense, you're losing touch with Atari. Okay? Because Atari was never about making sense. Atari was about making fun. It was about making outrageous, crazy new things, defining a new medium, breaking through into a new form of entertainment. We were launching interactive media.
Right.
And that was just super exciting to be at the beginning of that, right there in the whole the vortex of what was going on. It was just really exciting.
For the most part, were people assigned to work on certain games, or did you have to did you pitch ideas?
Both. I mean, there were games that were assigned because, some of the games, whenever you start a new medium, the first thing you do is you replicate everything from old medium in it, right? That's whenever there's a new medium, the first thing people do is replicate old media. So when the game first started, the first thing they wanted to do with the home system was start to deliver coin-op games, popular coin-op games, and they repeat that. And there was always an opportunity to create a new game, but nobody really knew what to do with that. And so people would pitch ideas, we would play with things. We had a very wacky existence because each of the people, I mean, in this kind of environment, you have people who are just super technically competent and they can do conversions, right? They can take a pre-existing idea and implement it. And then, but what you need people to come up with creative solutions. So there's creativity on a technical level. How do I do something innovative, abusing the hardware in a new way? And that's one form of creativity. But then there's also what's a whole different kind of game to play? What's a new concept in terms of goals and rules and entertainment that might be fun? That's a different kind of creativity. They're both creative endeavors, but I think they still come from different places in the brain. And we had both kinds there. But to me, by far, the most enjoyable people were the people who were more the game concept creative types. Because what you had was a bunch of really heavy duty nerds, but each one of them also had some sort of creative aspect to them as well. So no one was just a programmer. You were a programmer and a musician. You were a programmer and a poet. You were a programmer and a craft person. Everybody had another talent, at least one. And when we'd get together, we would come up with the most ridiculous, absurd ideas and just push and pull back and forth and just bounce off the walls and bounce off each other. And that led, it was very stimulating. And still to this day, I think that was probably one of the most engaging groups of people I've ever had the honor to work with.
Speaking of that, these bouncing ideas, like I want to start with Yars Revenge. It's such a fun game. It's placed on many lists as being one of the best Atari games of all time. First, also, can you briefly describe the plot of the game, how it came about from concept to production, and this is for later. How long does the game take to make, like something like Yars Revenge?
This is a great question. So, and obviously the entire story of all that is in my book, Once Upon Atari, How I Made History by Killing an Industry. But
Wait,
I'll
what
give
book?
you the very short version.
I didn't see that. What book?
Oh, this is a book called Once Upon Atari, How I Made History by Killing an Industry. It's by Howard Scott Warshaw. It's also available in audiobook, and Howard actually read the audiobook himself. Now, it's full of a lot of interesting stories and adventures because we did a lot of crazy, wacky stuff at Atari. In fact, we got our own building at one point, just the VCS department, and Atari security had orders to keep police away from this building. So we knew we could do anything we wanted to do in this building, and we did it. But we also had to keep games coming out. So, like I told you, when I got to Atari, I made a deal that I could take a big cut in salary and I'd be on probation right away and just give me a chance. Let me do anything and I'll just show you I can work here. So the first thing they did was they assigned me a coin-op game called Star Castle. And my first job was to convert Star Castle to the VCS. So I had read the manual. I'd spent a couple of days. I looked over some stuff, and I wasn't an expert by any means at that point, but I knew enough already to realize that Star Castle on the 2600 was just going to suck. It was going to absolutely suck, and I couldn't afford to have my first game suck. So on probation with that, I go right back to my manager and I say, look, I said, I think this game would stink on this machine. It's just not made for this machine. But I said, however, and I had drawn up some alternative pictures and on graph paper and stuff to lay it out. And I said, here's another way of approaching a game that I think, would play better. It has some of the kind of features, but it's a different focus. And that's the game that ultimately was going to become Yars' Revenge. And I was lucky at this point in time because later on in time, when they had a license for a game, there wasn't going to be any, no, I don't want to do this game. You had to do the game because that was their whole marketing strategy. But we weren't quite there yet. So when I went to them and said, look, that game's going to suck. This is going to be better. Let me do this. They said, okay. They let me do it. Now, it wasn't Yars' Revenge yet. It was just this game Howard's working on. Okay. And I started putting it together and there's a whole bunch of trials and tribulations and stuff. I mean, really unbelievable stuff. But eventually I got the game to a point where it was like super hot. Everybody who played it loved it. People were just super into it. And I was like really psyched. And now it was time for marketing to name the game. It still didn't have, my working title was called Time Freeze. Because the one thing I knew above all else with this game was it was going to have a big payoff screen. I wanted to have a big, spectacular payoff screen. Because I was all about the sizzle. And when it came time to name it, I actually out-marketed marketing. There's a whole story in the book about how I actually created the name Yars' Revenge and wrote a backstory, which was actually the first backstory in the history of video games.
Oh, that's about that.
Yars' Revenge actually set a lot of firsts in the video game industry that still live to this day. And it took me about 7 months to make the game. So I could tell you more of the stories if you like, but I know you have a lot of places you want to go. But there's some great stories. And so Yars' Revenge went on to become Atari's greatest selling original game.
Yeah, well, you just mentioned it. But my next question was, because that was the first, I was a big comic collector also. And that was the first game that I ever saw include a comic to introduce, the plot to players. So what did Atari say when you brought it to them? Hey, I want to include a comic in this.
Well, I didn't say I want to include a comic. So I'll tell you what I did, because this is a fun story. So they wanted to name the game, and marketing notoriously came up with these crappy names for anything. They wanted to rock fight or car race or something. That was the kind of names they would come up with. So the product manager came up to me and he goes, hey, we're going to be picking a name for the game soon. I said, hey, can I make a submission? He goes, yeah, but you better hurry because we don't have much time. I told him, come back tomorrow. This was one afternoon. I said, come back tomorrow. I'll have something for you. Okay, so he takes off. Now I sit down and I think, okay, I want to make up something. I want to make up a name. Now, on my bucket list, I have some interesting things on my bucket list, I think. And one of them was add a word to the English language. I had never had any idea how I would do that. But, Pac-Man was so big and everybody knew what Pac-Man was. I thought, if this game is really hot and really goes somewhere, this is my chance to name something in that character. If the game really becomes big, I'll absolutely be able to create a new word. Okay, so I thought this is a great opportunity. I couldn't think of anything good. Everything you make up sounds stupid when you try to make up a new word. So I went with an algorithm instead. I thought what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a cipher. First, I thought, one word in the title is going to be revenge. because everybody wants revenge. You gotta love revenge. And then who's getting revenge? I don't know. Who's it going to be? And then I thought, the CEO of the company, his name is Ray Kazar. So Ray spelled backwards is Yar. And Kazar spelled backwards is Razak. And I thought both of those are great sci-fi names. They've got Y's, they got Z's. That's all you need is X, Y's, and Z's, and you got sci-fi, right? So I said, okay, so it's the Yarian Revenge of Razak 4. There's this Razak solar system, and this monster came and blew away one of the planets. And the whole point of this game is that these Yars are going to be out there, and they're going to be getting revenge for having blown away one of their planets. So there's an idea. And then I thought, what's better than a name is a name and a story. Because, everybody had this extra talent, and my talent was always words. So I sat down and wrote a 12-page story called The Yarian Revenge of Razak 4, all about how these flies got on one of the first interstellar spaceships, and then they mutated and they wiped out the humans. They inhabited this other solar system, and then these monsters come along and blow out one of the planets. But it was a whole big sci-fi. It was an adult kind of sci-fi story that went along. Okay. And I just submitted that because I thought that would make the name stronger. I didn't realize it at the time, but I had just invented the backstory for video game. This was the first time a video game had a backstory. Wow. So then the guy comes back the next day. I was up all night. I took a nap briefly. And then like at 7:30, when the admins come in, I gave them the story. They typed it up. I had the whole package. I gave it to the guy that morning. He takes it. He submits the name. The next day, the guy comes by. I said, hey, have they made a selection yet? He goes, no, but it's very close. I said, okay. I said, I'll tell you a secret. You want to know a secret about the name? And he goes, yeah. I said, but this is really a secret. I don't want you to tell anybody because I don't want to influence this unduly. And the guy goes, okay. So I swear him to secrecy again. And I say, okay, the Yar thing, that name Yar? He goes, yeah. They spell that backwards. He goes, Ray. I go, yeah. And Razak, that solar system, spell that backwards. He goes, Kazar. Ray Kazar. He goes, oh my God, Ray Kazar. I said, yeah. And he goes, does Ray know about this? And I said, well, of course Ray knows about this. I wouldn't do something like this without Ray. But I said, but I don't want you to let people know about this in marketing because I don't want it to unfairly influence the name. And the naming of the game. And he goes, okay, so I swear him to secrecy 2 more times, and then away he goes. And at this point, I know 3 things, right? I know first, he's going to run right back to marketing and tell everyone. Okay. And the second thing I know is nobody in marketing has the balls to go talk to Ray about this anyway. So I'm not really that worried about it. And the third thing I know is that's a pretty good thing because Ray obviously has no idea. I pulled this out of my ass, and Kazar has no idea about this. And that's it. And then the day after that, he comes back, he goes, guess what? He goes, we're going with Yars Revenge. He goes, and you know what? That story is really something. He goes, we're thinking maybe we'll actually put together a comic book to go with the game. That was marketing's idea to do the comic book. I just gave them the story. And that's how Yars Revenge became Yars Revenge. It was my little plan to try and outmarket marketing just to defend myself against a stupid name.
That's great.
Funny. So let me guess. You were very impressed and you loved the Easter egg of HAL from 2001 Space Odyssey being 1 letter away from IBM.
The origin of Easter eggs in video games is not really about entertainment. It's not about having a fun thing to put in the game. It became that. And I'm glad to see that. And I actually was instrumental in that because the Easter egg in Yars Revenge is the first marketing approved Easter egg that was in the manual and promoted by the company. Okay. Mm-hmm. The origin of Easter eggs in video games is about distrust. It's about the darker side of the video game industry. Because the first Easter egg was Warren Robinette's adventure.
Right, yes.
Right, where it said created by Warren Robinette. You could find that. The reason was, Atari, Imagic and Activision, they would put the names of the designers on the box. They made it, like the Rockstar kind of thing and promoted the idea. Here's your favorite designer. Here's their game. Atari didn't want that. Atari never wanted anyone to know who made the game. They just wanted it to be an Atari game. So another one of the first that Yars Revenge achieved was it was the first time, and I think the only time ever, that Atari released the name of a programmer in a product.
Right.
And the reason was it was in the comic book as a credit for game programmer because it wasn't in the manual. They still wouldn't do that. But since there was a comic book, the comic book had credits for story and stuff like that. And they included a game programmer credit in the comic book. And that was the only time an Atari programmer ever got credit in a product.
Prior to Yars Revenge, that game designers didn't receive credit for creating their games. But did you change it? You either changed that or helped change that, right?
I changed it for one game. Okay. You see, the thing is, I'm a weird guy. I don't do things the way people normally do them. I get good results a lot of times. I've worked in many industries. I've had like 4 or 5 different careers, but everywhere I go, I do stuff differently than the way most people do them. And it creates new kinds of stuff, interesting things, and it creates new kinds of problems. And I did exactly that on Yars Revenge. So I put Atari in a position where they ended up having to kind of credit the game programmer when that's something they never do. I had also, the glittering thing in the center of Yars Revenge, the ion zone,
Right.
that's actually the code in the cart because we had so little memory. You had to do things to try and cheat and save space. And I wanted a really cool visual effect, but I didn't want to use any more graphic space. And what I realized was I need a like pseudo random distribution of bits. And I thought, well, the code is like that. The code is just sort of a pseudo random division of bits. So what I did was I just started putting pieces, I would grab a byte of the code, throw it in the graphics register, and then throw it in the color register. And it just worked. And it made this great effect. And then legal came to me when they heard about the legal department. There was one, Howard, what the hell are you doing now? Because they never had to talk to a programmer about putting their program on the screen. They thought this was a violation of copyright and stuff. And so I had to go through a whole explanation with hand puppets and stuff like that to explain to them that no one's going to be able to deduce all the code of the cart from where that was and stuff. But it was just, I always created some kind of new issue and problem for them, it seems.
With ion zones and evil drones, there's nothing else like Yars Revenge, the way out space game that's new from Atari. Who else?
Have you played Atari today?
Right out of the chute, you have a hit game. Just how did that affect your status within the company? And was there any jealousy from any of the other programmers?
The jealousy, there wasn't jealousy over that. People were just excited that there was a good game, and I shared techniques and stuff. I mean, I actually discovered new things to do on the machine, and said I would put out memos, I would share my techniques and stuff like that, and we all did that. We were all really happy to come up with new stuff, and so I think what it did, it just made me accept it, which was my goal. But the first game, you would think your goal in the first game is just to get it done and show you can do something. My goal with my first game was to really make a splash and to establish myself as a credible Atari game maker. That's what was important to me because I loved these people. I loved this environment. It was the first time in my life I found a place I really felt I belonged. And so I thought, oh my God, I've got to make sure I can join this club. I want to put out something that says, yes, I stand with all of you and I'm here and I'm real. And I think I achieved that with Yars Revenge. So that was awesome. Except, when you're fundamentally insecure, which I think I was, you do something like that. And my first thought is, oh no, now what do I do next? Because now if this was really good, everybody's going to expect more from my next game. And that turned out to be Raiders of the Lost Ark, which was the first video game from a movie. How do you follow an act like that? So
How long were they giving you to make it?
Oh, I have plenty of time for Raiders. I mean, it took me 7 months to do Yars Revenge. It wasn't released for another 5 months because Yars Revenge became the most tested game in Atari history because there was someone who was trying to kill it. Everybody loved this game except there was somebody out there, some people out there who were trying to kill the game, and they kept raising questions. They kept doing more testing. That's all covered in the book. That's a whole nother story. But Yars took 7 months to do. Raiders took 10 months to do. Because when I was going to do Raiders of the Lost Ark, I wanted it to be the biggest adventure anybody could imagine on the 2600. I just made all my choices in terms of making a bigger game impression, not in terms of making amazing graphics, but making a big, broad, interesting game with lots of literally different environments, really different gameplays. I just wanted to put everything in it. How I got to do Raiders is an interesting story because what they said was that Steven Spielberg had to approve the programmer for Raiders. So I was given a plane ticket, and one day I was told, okay, you're going to be interviewed. You're going to go down and meet Steven Spielberg. So I got a plane ticket. I had to get up like at 5:30 in the morning, go to the airport. I'm starting in San Jose, go to the airport, fly to LA, go through all the traffic, go through everything that's there. Had a 9:30 appointment in LA at Warner Studios. I made it there. After all that, I make it there at 9:25. I walk into the office. Here I am. And the receptionist just looks up at me and she goes, "Oh, hello, Mr. Warshaw. Your interview has been moved to 3:30." And I'm like, what? What? I flew here. I mean, oh my God, what do you mean? But you know, when life gives you lemons, I am a lemonade kind of guy. And so I thought, I am an incredible movie buff and TV buff. And here I am at Warner Brothers Studios with 6 hours to kill. So I just said to them, is it okay if I just cruise around the studio till then? They said, absolutely, go ahead, no problem. So I was given 6 hours to cruise around unescorted all over Warner Brothers Studios. I visited sets. I stole stuff off of some sets. I mean, I just had this total geek fan experience. And then at the end of that, I get to hang out with Steven Spielberg, who is like my idol, my movie idol at the time, except I'm there to interview for a job to do a job for him that's a derivative of his work. That's kind of a weird way to meet your hero. And but we did, and we finally showed up and got there. And we met and we played some Yars Revenge. I brought a copy of Yars with me, and he had all the game systems all set up there in his office and everything. He had an amazing layout. We played some Yars, and he liked that, and we were chatting. And then at one point, I did the thing that I think really got me the chance to do the game. I said to him, you know, Steven, I have this theory that you're actually an alien yourself. I said, would you like to hear it? He goes, yeah. And I explained, I really have this whole theory about how he was part of an advanced team that was culturalizing the planet to get us ready to meet the aliens in a pleasant way. I said, so you're the production arm, I figure. And I said, I just want to tell you, your marketing people, they're doing a great job. You know, you guys are really doing a good job. So, you know, nice work.
That's a sly way to pitch a movie idea, Howard. It seems like...
It's true. And this was before E.T. I think he was probably making E.T. at the time, but I didn't know anything about E.T. at that time. This is still pre-T, as they say. So, and that was it. And then I flew back that night to Atari in San Jose. And the next day when I went into work, they said, oh, you know, Spielberg called and you got the game. He wants you to do the game. That's how I got to do Raiders.
So he sounds like he was like a really nice person, right? I mean, so did you have to like pitch him ideas? Did he offer story suggestions to you to take?
No, Spielberg, I really like Steven Spielberg, I must admit. I mean, I haven't heard from him lately, which kind of disappointing. But because Steven Spielberg is someone who I think what he does, he picks people that he believes in and he lets them do their stuff. And that's what he did with this. When he felt I was the person, but I mean, we talked, we chatted, we really kind of connected, I felt. I think we connected as creative people. And so he left me a pretty free hand to go and do whatever I was going to do, as long as he believed I was the person. I didn't present him with a game design. With E.T., I actually had to formally present him with a game design. That's a whole nother story in the book. But he would come up, check it out. We would have lunch together. That was fun. That was really fun, hanging out with him.
But Raiders was so well known. Was there pressure to adapt that into a game because the players were so familiar with it?
Absolutely. No, there's a lot of pressure. Like I said, no. So I just, did Yars Revenge. Here we go. That got me the chance to do Raiders. But now it's like, holy crap, if I bomb on Raiders after having done Yars, that's going to be a big flop. That's really going to be loud. And I was afraid of that. But I was also afraid of not doing it. Not doing, I mean, I needed to do something. I really needed to try and establish, do something profound. So, and I did a number of things there. I wanted every one of my games to be groundbreaking in some significant way. That was super important to me. And so Raiders did a lot of things no one had ever seen before. I used two controllers for one player. Uh, there were techniques used in it, like the snakes you see in the room that actually hold their position down the screen. That was an interesting technique that I had developed. I used the same thing for the tsetse flies. It was a different kind of animation. There was, but the thing about Raiders of the Lost Ark is it's a great movie to do a game from. Yes, there's a lot of expectations, but it's a movie that has a real through line of action, and it is an action adventure movie. And that's the best kind of movie to do a game for, right? Because basically the thrust of what's going on. I can take creative license here and there with things because the graphics suck. So I'm not going to really be able to show anything dramatically well. But you've got to have the feel of moving forward through, be Indiana Jones and run around and do what you need to do. And I had the map room and the key, and you discover where they're buried, and you have like different tricks and feats to go through. So it was a good game. It was a good movie to do a game from.
You mentioned Easter eggs before, and you put them into, so which Easter egg was in Raiders?
Okay, so with Yars Revenge, the Easter egg that I put in was HSWWSH, which is called the Ghost of Yars. But I put in HSWWSH to tell people, hey, whatever you see, think of it backwards. And that's the key to tell players that Yar is really Ray and Razak is really Khazar. So that was my idea there. When I got to Raiders, I wanted to continue my thing. So I made these rules in my head of what I want to do with signature. So after Raiders, each one of my games has an HSW with a number. Raiders was HSW2, ET was HSW3. Also, I decided you're going to find one character of each of my previous games in the next game. So there's a place in Raiders where you can find a Yar. There's when you get inside one of the mesas and you dig up, towards the end of the game, if you've set the situation right, when you dig it enough, a Yar comes out and flies up through the screen. So you can find a Yar in Raiders of the Lost Ark. In ET, there's an HSW3, there's a Yar, there's an Indiana Jones, and there's also, if you really look at the phone pieces, if you look at all the phone pieces in ET, you'll notice one of them is a messed up H, one is a messed up S, and the other one's a messed up W. So it's like there's all kinds of Easter eggs spread out throughout those games.
So after you have Yars Revenge, you have Raiders, two huge successes. What was your standing in the company then? Were you like the golden child that like Nolan Bushnell come down and personally praise you and things?
Well, no, Nolan was gone.
Oh, he's gone then. Okay.
So Nolan didn't do that, but I mean, I was not disrespected in the company. I will tell you that. Yeah, I mean, I was doing pretty well. I was 2 for 2 million sellers. I don't know. I ended up 3 for 3. I mean, I don't know, but I just felt, holy crap. Now I've got 2 big selling games. How do I follow that? Now I'm thinking, now the next game needs to be really great. And then suddenly here comes ET.
Were you there at Atari when Atari acquired and produced Pac-Man?
Yes, I was there when they put out Pac-Man for the 2600. Todd Fry was the guy who did that game.
So I love how quick you are to give credit to anybody who put all that work into it. That's fantastic.
Absolutely. Well, credit was a sore point at Atari, so I always make sure to acknowledge those who deserve it.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm going to tell everybody I was interviewing with Jonathan and Moosie.
That's great.
Are
you sure you want to do that?
I'm pretty sure. Maybe I'll wait to see the interview first, but I'm still pretty sure I'm going to go with it.
It's funny because if you read the comments from now, I see a lot of complaints in videos about the problems with the Pac-Man video game. But at the time, it was the best-selling video game of all, then, and everyone had it. I had it and loved it as well. So at Atari, were you aware of the complaints about it at the time? And did that cause like any worry in the company?
We became aware of it for sure. And it became the pack-out cartridge because when the sales started to drop, because people were somewhat disappointed with it, They made it the Pac-Out cartridge. That means every base unit went with a Pac-Man, which is one of the things that made it one of the all-time biggest selling carts on the system. But Todd didn't feel he really had the memory. He asked them for more memory and they wouldn't give him more memory to do it. So he felt he did the best thing he could do with the memory he had. And he tried to capture the gameplay as best he could. But, later on, people came out with Ms. Pac-Man and Pac-Man Jr. and stuff like that. And that looked fabulous on the 2600, but those were done with more memory and a different kind of setup. Those were done later with better technology. And Todd was not given that tech to do this game with. But people don't care. I mean, players don't care what goes into a game. They care what their play experience is. And a lot of people were disappointed with Pac-Man, just like a lot of people were disappointed with E.T.
Well,
Not that I ever heard about that.
Well, let's talk about E.T. So, hugely successful movie, great film. So, how did Atari get involved in the first place, and how did you become involved in it?
Well, Atari became involved with it because Atari wanted Warner Industries, who had bought Atari and taken over Atari. They wanted Steven Spielberg to leave Universal and come to Warner Brothers.
Mhm.
So E.T. seemed like a great opportunity. So what they do is they entered this long negotiation to get the rights to E.T. Now, while this is happening, I'm working on Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I'm trying to finish Raiders of the Lost Ark. And just as I literally finish Raiders of the Lost Ark, just come to the end of this 10-month slog, I get a call from Ray Kazar. I literally get a call from my boss's 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 boss calls me up in my office. Never happens. That never happens. Okay. But this time it did. And this was July 27th of 1982. And here's Ray Kazar. I answer the phone, and they go, "Will you hold for Ray Kazar?" Sure. He signs my checks. I'll hold for this guy. And it's like, and he comes on the phone. He goes, "Hey, Howard." And I knew him from the Yars Revenge debacle, because he eventually did hear that I pulled that shenanigan with him. And he thought that was kind of funny. And he calls you up. He goes, "Hey, Howard," he goes, "we need E.T., an E.T. video game, but we need it for September 1st, which is 5 weeks and a half day, 5 weeks and 1/2 day away." And he goes, "Can you do it?" And I said, absolutely, I can do this. I said, provided we reach the right agreement. And so he knew what I meant, and I believed it. I totally believed it, because I thought this was a great opportunity. I mean, it's 7 months to do Yars, 10 months to do Raiders. Now I've got to do a game in 5 weeks. I did not know that he had already called my boss's boss, and my boss's boss, the head of VCS development, had told him, "No, you can't have a game. We can't do a game in 5 weeks. Just can't do it. Can't happen." And Ray still called me directly after that conversation. I didn't know he had this conversation. So even though my boss's boss had just told him, "No way you can do that," I'm calling, go, "Yeah, sure, I'll do it. No problem." If I would have known, I would have felt a lot weirder about that conversation.
Yeah.
But that's how I came to. Also, Spielberg has specifically asked for me to do the game after Raiders. He really liked what I did with Raiders. What I did find irresistible was the challenge. Like I said, after Yars, I thought, oh my God, you'd think I'd be happy with the success of 2 games. But with Yars, like, oh my God, how am I going to follow this? And then I get to do Raiders, which is super high profile, and that's gone really well. And now it's like, oh no, well, when's the next shoe going to drop? And then here comes E.T., and I thought, I'm still trying to prove myself. I'm still trying to find a way to prove myself. But when I heard that we had this incredibly short amount of time, I thought, if I can pull this off, maybe then I can really believe I'm cool and can do this, and I'll settle some of my insecurities. I think that was actually at the root of it. That and an incredible amount of hubris, on my part, because I really believed I really understood and had mastered the VCS to a substantial degree. And doing a game in 5 weeks, it's ridiculous. And everybody else said, "You're stupid and you're crazy for doing it." It was like, and you talked about envy or jealousy, right? So we had gotten a bonus plan while I was doing Raiders, Atari had come up with a real royalty plan because they were tired of losing top people to other companies because they weren't really paying much. So there was a meeting on the third day. In fact, if you see this picture on the cover of my book, Once Upon Atari, this is me on my 25th birthday. This is actually the fourth day of Raiders of the Lost Ark. It started on a Tuesday afternoon. This is that Friday. You'll see on the screen, if you can see the screen up there, that's one of the screens from E.T., right? So this is me. I'm actually in my office working on the game. I already have one screen up. It didn't do a lot, but at least I had a screen on the screen, as they say. So that day there was a department meeting. That was a crazy day because that t-shirt I'm wearing also, it says "How weird." There's a whole story behind that shirt that was a practical joke that my girlfriend had arranged, because when I came to work that day, everyone in the department was wearing one of those shirts. It was just really weird, but that's a whole nother story. So we go to the department meeting and they announce at the department meeting, Howard is going to be doing E.T., the E.T. video game. And people were grumbling and people, oh God, Howard gets to do all the good titles. So, you know what? I had done one big title with Raiders and now I'm doing E.T. and people are grumbling. And I heard that. I did not like that, I must say. And so what I did was a typical kind of Howard thing to do. I stood up in the meeting, right? Then I said, hey, I said, this game, the E.T. game, is due September 1st. This is July 30th, right? So basically you have August. I said, it's due September 1st. Anybody who wants it, raise your hand, you can have it. Crickets. Not a word. And after that, no one ever complained that Howard gets to do E.T. Never heard that again. What I did hear was, oh my God, Howard is out of his mind. Howard is insane, trying to do that. And then as I started to work through it and was starting to achieve it and get it together, then people started to really get upset because they thought, oh no, if he does a game in 5 weeks, they're going to want all the games done in 5 weeks, and what's that going to do? And there was a lot of interesting emotions that swept through the department as I worked through this game.
And you had to pitch it to Spielberg again? You had to pitch ideas for this game, for E.T.?
Yes. Oh my God. So when that phone call, which is, where the book begins, is with that phone call. Because this book is the story of E.T., it's the story of me at Atari, and it's the story of me in my life, all the way from very early on through becoming a therapist, which I ultimately did. When they told me, okay, you're going to do the E.T. game, this is Tuesday afternoon, Ray said to me, okay, get a design together, because Thursday morning at 8 a.m., I will never forget this, Thursday morning at 8 a.m., there will be a Learjet waiting at San Jose Executive Terminal for you. Be on it. You're going to come down to Burbank and you're going to pitch the design to Spielberg. So, 36 hours to design a whole video game is absurd, but if you're going to do a game in 5 weeks, you can't really take much more to design it anyway. And the truth is, the one thing I realized, my secret in doing this whole thing, the reason I said, okay, I can do this absolutely, and was confident, was because if you think about it, programming a video game, programming in 5 weeks, it's not a programming problem. If you're going to do a game that would ordinarily take 5 or 6 months and try to do it in 5 weeks, that's a fail. That's not going to work. It's never going to happen. It's not a programming problem, it's a design problem. And so what I needed to do was design a game that could be done in 5 weeks. And I felt confident I could figure that out. That was the challenge. See, because it created this inversion in your design structure and goals. Because just like Moosie was pointing out, it's like, usually you'd work on a game and you work on it long enough until it's a good game. And then you release the game. So the variable is time. The standard is the quality. In this case, what you have to do is flip it. Now, the variable is going to be game quality, and the standard is going to be the schedule, right? So now I just have to figure out something I can do, which is going to eliminate a lot of genres and a lot of things, because I'm not going to have time for tuning and rumination and stuff, which is a very important part of the game process, right? Most games are playable. There's a milestone in game development called first playable, right? And first playable is the first time all the rules are implemented, all the players and pieces are at least represented, maybe not graphically generous, but represented, so you can actually start to explore the gameplay and see what works and what doesn't and what needs tweaking and you start tuning and you start reviewing. And that usually happens somewhere between 25 and 40% of the development. And the vast majority of the development of any video game is taking first playable and making it better and better and better and better till you get a good game. What I knew was in 5 weeks, I could probably get to first playable, which puts an incredible pressure on the design to be perfect, which it wasn't. First to admit it, okay? But it was good enough that I could deliver a complete game that completed quality assurance and got through, sufficiently bug-free and a releasable, full, complete game. And I did that by restricting myself to what I knew I could do and but like I said before, I want every one of my games to be groundbreaking in some way. And, even E.T. E.T. was the first video game to have a 3D playing world, because the world you play E.T. on is actually a cube. And it all makes sense, and it maintains, you go from screen to screen, where you are on the cube, it always works. Okay, so it was the first game with a 3D world. It was also the first game, I believe, with situation power-ups, where your power-up potential depends on where you are and what's going on, as opposed to having one power you use throughout the game. And so there were several things that I did that were revolutionary. But on April 24th, 2014, at the dig at Alamogordo, E.T. became groundbreaking in a whole new way that I had never anticipated before, when it literally came up out of the ground at the dig.
So I read that before the release, that Atari skipped testing.
Well, they skipped consumer testing. Yars Revenge was the most tested game ever. And at the end of that, they just stopped doing consumer testing.
Oh.
They didn't do any consumer testing with ET, but there wasn't any time because it had to be shipped right out. And as of September 1st, it had to go to manufacturing. The reason the schedule is so short, okay, so I should probably clarify that. It wasn't just a random thing, hey, just do it in 5 weeks. They took a long time to negotiate to get the rights. They never told us they were doing it. This was like a secret negotiation. If they would have said, hey, we're going to be working up something, can you guys start working on a game for ET? That would have been a great thing to do, but they didn't do that. So July 27th was when they finished the negotiation. That's when they told engineering, we want an ET game. That was the first we heard about it. Now, they wanted that game out for Christmas. They decided this game has to hit the shelves for Christmas, period. It absolutely has to. So, and this is pre-internet. You don't drop a game and then drop updates and stuff. This game has to go into physical manufacturing, which means it has to be on shelves, by mid to early November, which means it has to be out of manufacturing and shipped by the end of October. And if you want to do a few million of something to do that, you have to deliver the image of the game, the completed game, September 1st to be able to hit that schedule. That's why it was 5 weeks, because they had to have it for Christmas and they had wasted all that time negotiating that could have been development time. And that's what was left. So that's how that happened.
Did you show it to, when it was done, did you show it to like Spielberg? Or was there any trepidation about it from you?
Absolutely. I negotiated a deal with Atari where I was going to get a significant bonus if it was completed. But I didn't want Atari to say, hey, that's not really done. We're not going to pay you the bonus and then release it the day after. Mm-hmm. Okay. So what I made a deal with them that Spielberg had to approve the game. It was up to Spielberg. Atari still had play testers, and it went through to check it, cleared of bugs and stuff like that. So it did get testing internally just to make sure it wasn't buggy and to make sure the game played and flowed, but it wasn't super quality check. It was just a technical check to make sure the game wasn't buggy. But it did pass that. Spielberg was the one who actually approved the game. He came up, he played the game, he fell into the pits, he was able to get out of them. He played around in the game for a while. and he approved it. Of course, he was getting $22 million for this game to get released. So I think he was motivated, which is part of why I wanted him to pass on it. But it was, yeah, but Spielberg approved the game for sure.
Well, so it's funny because I went back and read the reviews from the time, and it mostly got positive reviews, and it started off selling really well. When did you first start hearing that there might be some issues with the game?
The first that I heard anything about it, because, okay, this is pre-internet, right? Which means there wasn't this incredible online, rave attack,
Right.
flame war or anything. This was just, so the game, everybody bought it. A lot of people bought it for a Christmas present, which means nobody opened it. It was like one of the top selling games through December, but nobody opened it till Christmas, right? So people weren't playing it early. Then here's Christmas. Now, and I finished working on that game September 1st, right? So I've been working on other stuff. My head was already in other places for months now. Okay. So now around February, when the returns start coming back, and now they're starting to see some of the results, and now there's some game magazines who got the game, and now they're publishing their reviews and some of their feedback. And now you're starting to hear some of the negative feedback. That's not till February, well into February. This is like 6 months, 7 months after I finished the game. Okay. And what I hear is people I hear exact kind of walking around the hallways, and then they come up to me and they go, "You know something, Howard? We don't blame you. We don't blame you. You really came through for us." This is out of the blue because they're not showing me sales figures, they're not showing me any of the stuff. This is just, they just come up to me, randomly come up and say, "We don't blame you." And I'm like, "Hey, I'm okay with not being blamed, but like for what?" It's like, I don't know what they're talking about, but I'm okay. I'm not being blamed.
Yeah.
It's like, and then it started to trickle back, and it increasingly became clear that there was a lot of returns, and there was some real problems with it, and people were complaining about it. But even after all the returns were accounted for, it still sold over 1.5 million,
Wow.
making it my third straight million seller. I was 3 for 3, which I don't believe any other person who published more than one game can claim.
It didn't take optimism out of the company or anything like that, right? I mean, it was just still move forward.
Didn't take optimism out of me, that's for sure.
Great.
But through 1983 was a year that started off, it seemed like things were going to be pretty cool, except that a lot of the industry, by the end of 82, it was clear there was kind of a downturn coming because numbers just weren't going the way they had been. And into 83 started off with everybody still trying to jump in and go crazy with the video game industry. And by the end of 83, it was clear that, basically the bottom was falling out and it was going. So 83 was a rough year in the video game industry. And I'll give you an example. In Atari, the video game industry, the whole crash thing,
Right.
that's coming on. So in 82, everybody's excited, and Atari has about 12,000 employees. They had many buildings across the valley. Their total employment, about the end of 82 was like about 12,000. In the beginning of 83, they started to see the numbers, see what was going on. Things were going horrible, and Ray Kazar ends up getting fired, right? They get rid of Ray Kazar, and they bring in another another big industry exec who knows nothing about entertainment or technology, right? Which was what Ray Kazar was. Ray Kazar was like a senior vice president at Burlington Textiles and stuff. Nothing about entertainment, nothing about tech. He was a manager. And then they get this guy, Jim, why can't I think of his name? Jim Morris or something like that, but he was from Philip Morris. And Jim Morgan from Philip Morris. And he comes in. And so throughout 1983, he takes Atari from 12,000 employees to 2,000 employees. Throughout this year, because remember in the early 80s, I don't know if you guys were around for the early 80s. I was totally around for the early 80s. There was this thing called the corporate raiders. People were buying companies and selling off stuff, or people were just doing massive layoffs to cut payrolls to try and improve the financial picture of a company. So Morgan comes in, starts slashing the company, and takes it over the course of a number of months from 12,000 to 2,000 employees. And then they fire him because it's not improving anything. Nothing's getting better. And then in 1984, in early 1984, they negotiate a deal to sell the home computer and the home entertainment, the home games divisions to the Tremels. So, and I was still there when it was 2,000 people. Then the Tremels come in, and they do the real corporate raider thing, and they start selling off, equipment and buildings and all that stuff. And they take the company from 2,000 people to 200 people. So over the course of about 13 months, I saw the company go from 12,000 people to 200 people, and I was still there.
Wow.
But I wasn't going to be there a lot longer. Because that was kind of the end of my engagement with Atari, because it became clear that games were not really where they were going anymore. But that whole thing, that whole transition was so quick, because a lot of people don't realize Atari was the fastest growing company in the history of American business at the time. And then throughout 83 and at the beginning of 84, it became the fastest falling company in the history of American business. It was the most amazing rocket ride up and crash down that there's ever been. And I was there for that whole ride. And it was sadder at the end than it was at the beginning, but it was an awesome journey. Awesome journey. As detailed in my book, Once Upon Atari.
You have a book? I didn't. Whoa, okay, there we go. Yeah.
Really sad. Yeah, I remember all that. I remember when Atari just like started dying out, I was sad because I loved Atari as well. But I want to go back to the ET, because for years there had been the big urban legend going around that Atari buried their stock of ET games. And we'll get up to the digging in a minute because you already mentioned it. But at the time, did you hear any of that? Were you aware that they had actually buried games? What were your thoughts about it?
I heard nothing about it. I never heard anything about it. I always thought it was not true. Over the years, I always thought it couldn't possibly be true.
For a company that's really in dire financial straits to take all this inventory that's supposedly worthless and literally truck it out into the desert and cover it up with cement and mash it over with tractors, the kind of thing you do with nuclear waste, just seems absurd. It seems ridiculous. So on that level, I always thought it can't possibly be true. And here it is. I mean, we're here looking at the excavation, which I've never really believed the stuff would be here.
First of all, why would a company that's hemorrhaging money spend even more money to go and truck millions of cartridges out into the desert, to bulldoze them, to pour concrete over them? That's a lot of Teamster money you got to spend there. Yeah. Why would a company that's losing money spend more money to get rid of something that's theoretically worthless? It didn't make any sense. But remember, when you expect things to make sense, you're losing touch with Atari, right? But aside from that, I always thought I was kind of plugged into the Atari grapevine. And if I would have gotten wind that they were burying a bunch of ET carts somewhere, what I would have done was I would have grabbed a photographer, gotten on a plane, flown out there, because I would have to have a picture of me standing on top of like a mountain of these cartridges. I would just have to have that. And so I never heard anything about that.
It's so bizarre. I mean, but so did they ever explain what the thinking was in burying the games instead of just taking them back or even destroying them? I mean, what was the logic with this?
Well, the urban myth was that the game was so bad that they had to bury the games just to cover the stench, right? That's the myth. The truth of it was that they weren't getting rid of ET games. The truth of it was they were trying to empty out a warehouse to use it for something else. And they had all this product in the warehouse. And at the dig, like if you see the movie, you see Atari Game Over, they show that what came up out of the pit was not just ETs, but all kinds of games and base units and controllers and just all kinds of stuff. They had just emptied a warehouse. Now, again, if you're going to empty a warehouse, why don't you just throw open the doors, let everybody come in, grab everything and run away? And that would be quick and less expensive. But that's not how Atari did stuff. They wanted to get rid of it and they were worried people were going to try and grab it. They didn't even cannibalize the inventory to use it for something else. It was just a strange choice that they made.
That's so bizarre.
All right, so, Howard, since you haven't mentioned your book, let me do it. Your book, Once Upon Atari, How I Made History by Killing an Industry. It's such a fascinating book. I highly recommend it. But let's talk about the title because you have such a great sense of humor about it. But did you really hear at the time and afterwards, like that you were the one responsible for killing Atari? Did you hear people saying that?
Oh no. I mean, people would say, boy, that was a big problem, the ET game and stuff. No, the idea that it actually destroyed the industry, the first time I ever saw that was in like 95. It was 1995 in New Media Magazine. There was an issue of New Media Magazine where they talked about the ET game, which was responsible for destroying the video game industry in the early 80s. It was just, it was, back then there wasn't, it was new. Everything was new. There's no sense of history, no sense of that. It was just the industry turned bad. All the finance people ran away. Video games were just a fad. There wasn't like someone who pointed, there weren't many people who pointed to the ET game and said, oh my God, that was a destruction. People talked about Pac-Man and ET being problematic in releases, but that was later on, right? What was happening then was people were just crazy that this incredibly productive, huge, overnight multi-billion-dollar industry was disappearing. That was the big story. But over time, when people start to ask why, that's when you start trying to really analyze it and tell the story of what really happened. And when you tell a story, and it was a tragedy, right? I mean, companies, people lost their jobs, people lost their livelihoods. There was a lot of horrible stuff that was a product of the game crash that happened. But when you tell a story like that, whenever you tell the story of a tragedy, you need a face. You've got to tell it with a face, right? You know this being in media, right? If there's a hurricane, you've got to have the people who their house was wiped out. Yeah. You've got to see the face of the people. So every tragedy needs a face. And what happened was E.T., I think, got chosen as the face of the crash of the video game industry. And I wound up being the butt behind that face, I think, is basically the way I think of it.
Well, when did you first start hearing that there were plans to go out to the Alamogordo in New Mexico desert to dig up the games? Who got you involved in that?
Well, I started to hear about it when they were going to make a game. They were going to make a movie, right? I heard that, and I didn't hear it from the people making the movie. I heard it from a lot of other people who were being talked to by the people making the movie. And people kept emailing me from all over the web and go, hey, Howard, did you hear about this? They're making a movie. They're making a movie about the ET thing, about burying the carts. They're making a movie. Have they talked to you? And no, they had. I was hearing about that from, I would say, October or November of, I guess, 2013. And then about February of 2014, Zach Penn, who was the guy who directed that movie, Atari Game Over, finally called me up. I guess they had always been planning to talk to me eventually, but they did. And we had a very consequential conversation. We talked about a bunch of stuff. And I think he really, after talking with me for a while, I think he figured he had more of a story than maybe he was thinking originally. And so he's kind of shifted his editorial focus. And then we did some very long, exhaustive interviews. And then we did some more interviews there. They flew me out to Alamogordo, and I was on site for that. And they did all that, and they made the movie, and it was awesome. The executive producers on that movie, between them, there's 2 Emmys and 2 Oscars. At the end of the movie, there's a very emotional scene. And to this day, whenever I see that movie, I still get emotional when I see myself getting emotional. It chokes me up because a lot of people go, well, wasn't it humiliating? Or wasn't it horrible? Finally, here it is. Look, your game was just buried all that time ago. But that's not what it was, not by any means. I always looked at making video games as producing broadcast media. There's a lot of ways to look at what a video game is. It's a program, it's a biofeedback loop. There's a lot of interesting ways to look at it, all of which are in my book, Once Upon Atari. But one way I used to really look at it was a piece of broadcast medium. And with a piece of broadcast medium, what's your goal? My goal, I have 3 goals when I put out a piece of broadcast medium. I want to entertain, I want to inform, and I want to generate social discourse. If I can do all three of those things with a piece of media, I feel that's a great success. So here we are at the dig in Alamogordo. 30 years ago, I had written 8K of computer code, or actually 6K of computer code and 2K of graphics that my graphics guy, Jerome Demurit, had put in. And that's it in 5 weeks, the hardest 5 weeks of my life, I think, because those 5 weeks were brutal, just brutal to actually make that happen. And here we are, and we're at this dig. Now, there's hundreds and hundreds of people there. Have you ever gone to a dump and seen hundreds of people lined up waiting to get into the dump? I've never seen that before. And that's what was going on there. And now all these people are all crowded around, and there's food trucks, and there's politicians there, and there's media people literally from all over the world. I must have done like 15 interviews during the day with various media outlets and things like that. And nobody knows what's going to go on. And then at one point, here it is. They found an ET game, and they bring it up, and they push me to the front, and there it is, and I authenticate the game, and they show it to me, and then all the cameras are sticking in my face, and well, Howard, what's going on? How does it feel? It's like, and I still get choked up thinking about it, because what it struck me was that, people were so excited. The crowd was cheering and yelling and everything. It was exciting. And I thought, this thing that I worked so hard on, that I had done 30 years earlier, is still generating this kind of excitement, this kind of attention. All these people are crowded around, and they're happy, and they're excited. It's this big event. And I thought, to have been the source of that, to have been at the core, at the beginning of that, and to see that happening, it was one of the most incredibly satisfying moments. I was so glad that they found it there, and that to have been a part of that was just awesome.
Well, supposedly there were like around 700,000 games that had been buried there, but they only dug up 1,300. So why didn't they do the rest? And does that mean there are still hundreds of thousands of video games buried there?
Yeah, there's a lot of games still down there. They had bulldozed over all the stuff and then literally cemented over it. So when they did the dig, they had to crack through a cement cover.
Wow.
That was there. To excavate the whole thing would have just, it's a lot of work.
That's so crazy. So, Howard, you're so firmly established in the history of this element of pop culture. When you look back on your time at Atari and the industry in general, what do you feel your legacy is?
I'm very proud to have established some standards, because I think to me, that's a great thing. It's great to be someone who shows people unexplored or unrealized potential. And by doing things that no one had ever seen before at a time where things were still new, and to help define a new medium, interactive entertainment, to help be one of the people who helped define what does that mean, interactive entertainment. To be one of the people who contributed to defining what that environment is, and to have expanded the concept of it. That's really important to me. But I would say the greatest legacy that still comes back to me, I was at a show just a couple of weeks ago, classic gaming shows, where people come up and tell me about how I contributed to their youth. I mean, I'm the last generation that grew up without video games, right? So when I was growing up, I didn't want to be a video game maker because there was no such thing. I wanted to be a movie director is what I wanted to do. So it's made it really weird when I started working with Spielberg.
Yeah.
But growing up, there were some difficult times that I faced at various times. And I know that as we grow, especially through adolescence and stuff like that, there can be some difficult moments. And that's aside from people who are in abusive situations or really difficult situations. And the idea, when I made those games, in my head, what I was thinking of was, I want to create such a compelling experience that whatever's going on for the people who are playing this game, it takes them out of that world and brings them into my world, this world that I've created that's going to be a fun place for them. And I've had a tremendous amount of feedback from people over the years that say, I spent so many hours playing your games, And those hours meant something to me. And for some people, like as a therapist, I mean, there are people who actually say this preserved their sanity. It gave them a break from a horrible thing or some horrible situation they were in. To have been that part of their life, that's the greatest legacy to me, is that there are millions of lives that I have touched in a positive way. And people occasionally email me, I still get the feedback, and it's just energizing for me.
Yeah,
That's probably, I would say, the greatest legacy.
It's a well needed escape, like
Mhm.
entertainment. It's medicine. One of the entertainment thrived. One of the only things, if not the only thing, during the Great Depression. And people need that. And Jonathan still has, by the way, a console with all the built-in games. Is that right, Jonathan?
I do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I have the 2600.
Nice.
They released a few years ago with all the games on it.
Yeah.
I love it. My kids is not as much, but I love it. So
I'll tell you one more legacy thing that I like, because you have cited this. You said the Yars Revenge is frequently cited as one of the best games of all time. And that's true. And E.T., people ask me, is E.T. really the worst game of all time? I don't think it's really the worst game of all time, but I do prefer when people call it the worst game of all time. Because as long as E.T. is the worst and Yars is the best, my legacy is to have the greatest range of any game designer in history.
Right. And also, they're talking about it, regardless of whether they think someone might think it might be the worst or one of the worst games. They're talking about it.
It is true. We're 40 years later and we're still talking about it. So
let me ask you,
I'm doing that social discourse thing.
Are there any games that you like playing now?
Absolutely. I just finished Spider-Man on the PS5, and that was awesome.
I heard that.
Better graphics than the 2600, in my opinion. And I am a hopeless, I'm like so stuck in Royal Match. I'm like, it's level 3400 or something. It's like crazy. I can't stop playing that game.
Well, there was nothing like that thrill when I got the 2600 home and was able to play all these games that were in the arcade. And kids don't understand that now, that it was just you weren't able to do that then. So there was such a big deal to get the 2600.
It was. I mean, the legacy of the video game industry that's really huge is two things. One, it turned television from a passive medium to an active medium. Now, instead of being a zombie just sitting on the couch zoning out in front of a television, now people are zombies jumping up and down, screaming at their television, right? So that changes the world. And the other thing it did was that video games were the killer app that put computers in homes. At the time when IBM was just crossing the 10,000 mark in terms of number of PCs in homes, Atari was crossing the 3 or 4 million mark.
Right.
And people would sell programming apps and things like that for it. Atari brought computers into the home in a way that nobody else ever did. And in terms of, shifting from a non-computer based home kind of experience to a computer-based home experience, I think Atari was a major, major player in that conversion. And that was societally a huge step. I'm not saying it was a great one. I'm just saying it was a significant one.
It was a great one. And I got to tell you, so we have Atari to thank for these moments early on. I don't know about you guys, but look, there's no quarters. You don't have to put quarters in it. Like you're at home, it doesn't need tokens. You just you can play it as many times as you want. Yeah, just keep playing it. Yeah.
And if you didn't have it, you knew someone who did, and you'd hang out with them more.
Yes, right.
Well, Howard, how can people follow you on social media?
Well, you can always see me at onceuponatari.com or hswarshaw.com, which is my therapy website, and on HSWMFT on Instagram. And I'm just Howard Scott Warshaw on Facebook.
Just to get a plug in for you, what kind of therapy do you do now?
Well, I'm the Silicon Valley therapist because I am a former tech manager. And what I do is I work with high-tech leaders and the people trying to love them. And so I'm very good because I'm bilingual. I speak both English and nerd, so I can help couples translate when they're having trouble understanding each other.
Perfect.
Well, Howard, I want to thank you for coming on here. It was so much fun getting to talk to you and hear the story. It's, you're part of our childhood. So, and you created a lot of great memories for us. So thank you for coming on.
that means everything to me. The idea that I was able to help give you something that you value in your life. And as a therapist, that's what it's all about, right? It's helping people do better in their lives. But the way I put it was I came full circle. I started off entertaining nerds with games, and now as a therapist, I literally make their lives better. It's great work, and I'm very proud to do it. Thank you so much, both of you, Jonathan
you.
and Moosie. I mean, you guys were great, and I really enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you, Howard. Really appreciate it.
Oh, by the way, you can find Once Upon Atari, How I Made History by Killing an Industry on Amazon and Audible.
Oh, we
So
should have
check
led
it
with
out,
that.
please.
Yeah.
It's a really fun book, by the way. I
What
read
was
it.
I thinking?
Fun book, yes. So, and for people who grew up with it, it's fun. All right, I'll sign us out now. And well, again, this has been Pop Culture Retro. I'm Jonathan Rosen with Moosie Drier. And again, a very special thanks to Howard Scott Warshaw. And please like, comment, and subscribe.
Thank you for tuning in to Pop Culture Retro, where no one was hurt during the making of this podcast. Listening to this podcast just makes you really cool.